So I was reading today how there's this article. It's actually an older article, but I just ran across it about how young people are experiencing widespread psychological distress over the government's mishandling of the looming climate crisis. It's a mouthful, isn't it? So there's this big study of like 10,000 young people between the ages of 16 and 25, and they were asking them about different things. And one of the questions was about how they felt um, about climate change and the way governments were handling it, what they saw in their future. And one of the concepts that came up out of this was that many young people feel a sense of institutional betrayal. Now, here's the thing. All of what I just said is there's three things about it that kind of frustrate me. One, the language is completely loaded. So, like, young people, how many? Well, it's around half to three quarters, 16 to 25-year-olds. Okay, 16-year-olds don't vote. 25-year-olds, more and more studies show your brain isn't even fully developed until you're around 25. So we're talking about an age group that is perhaps the most easily influenced by the massive amount of media and that they're surrounded with, and then by the educational institutions that they're a part of. So young people are experiencing widespread psychological distress. Well, could that be because what's being poured into them is stuff that's intended to distress them? The mishandling of a looming climate crisis. So, how's it being mishandled? Because governments aren't doing enough. That's basically the idea. But do young people understand what is being done? Do they understand what can be done? Do they understand any of those complex nuances? One of the things that I've seen over and over again is that scientists don't agree on what can be done or what should be done. Most of the conversation is bogged down in politics rather than science. So mishandling seems like a pretty strong word for something that people can't get on the same page about. And also, just the very thought of it being a crisis, like, is it a crisis? Is it something that needs to be handled in the future? Is it something that's not even an issue at all? I know that many people say that this is an issue that's settled, but like so many other things, when we're talking about science, nothing's actually settled because that's how science works. You keep doing it and you keep checking and you keep checking. And it would be one thing if there was one scientist out there who was saying, hey, listen, I'm not sure about this. I would still say, hey, there's one guy out there who's a scientist who's not sure. But the fact is, there are hundreds, there are thousands, there are so many scientists out there who don't agree on this thing that perhaps the whole use of the word crisis may be part of the reason why there's psychological distress. So, one, the language is loaded. Two, the other thing that really bothers me is how much loaded language feels like nothing more than propaganda. The language that is loaded isn't language committed to facts. It's language that is committed to provoking people to a particular response. It's manipulative by its very nature. And the thing is that if your intent is to manipulate, then a climate crisis is a perfect opportunity because a non-human enemy, kind of like a disease, if there was a disease that was, threatening the entire world, a non-human enemy creates global unity. Everybody can get behind this non-human enemy, and we can come together, and we could imagine a world where there's no wars and there's no borders and there's there's no suffering and there's no pain. It'd be like utopia. It'd be John Lennon's favorite place ever. If only the world could get behind, could get together and fight this one common enemy. It also helps when the enemy can't talk back, so you can't sympathize with said enemy because the enemy can't tell you its side of the story. What I'm saying is that when the commitment is not to strict scientific factual language, but rather to these types of words that are loaded, then that always begs the question: what's really going on? Is it news or is it propaganda? And the third thing is this phrase, institutional betrayal. This one really gets me because it's kind of like institutional racism. It alleviates personal responsibility from the individual. See, it's not my fault. It's an institutional issue. It's not even really your fault. It's an institutional issue. The only answer is for us to change the institutions. It does not escape me that the vast majority of climate activists also tend to be socialists. That there is this sense in which capitalism is the scapegoat for the institutional failure. And if we could just replace that with stronger, centralized socialist government, then we could make the kinds of changes that need to be made in order to prevent this looming climate crisis. You follow me? And what's interesting about that is that most of the studies that I've seen on how people handle climate kind of tie to this. They kind of run parallel to this. For instance, there's a study I saw several years ago that said that the majority of people who believe in man-made climate change and that it is a crisis which needs to be resolved are waiting for the government to fix it, while the majority of people who do not believe in man-made climate change and do not think it's a crisis conduct their personal lives with the utmost sense of responsibility for the environments in which they live. They are conservationists. They care about their environment and they take personal responsibility to address the issues around them, like litter and making sure that you're not wasting energy or wasting natural resources. So it is fascinating to me how the very people who get accused of not caring about the climate often care more about their environment personally. So anytime I see a phrase like institutional betrayal, that's what I think of. Anyway, this is supposed to be a proper Christian response to things that are in culture. So let me give you the two proper Christian responses to this idea of widespread distress over a mishandling of a looming climate crisis. One, Christians need to love the truth, and they need to pursue the truth, not an agenda, not what is best for our jobs or our economy or what keeps us comfortable and happy. If in fact science shows that there is needs that the climate needs to be addressed, then we should be the first ones out there trying to address those issues. We need to pursue truth wherever it leads. We also need to pursue truth with regard to the kinds of interventions regarding climate, like putting up a windmill may seem like a really great way of moving towards green energy, except that the amount of energy that is produced to make the giant steel windmills that we see on those hillsides is actually greater than the amount of energy that any of those windmills will ever produce throughout the course of their lifetime. So that's not a science-based mitigation for climate change and a supposed crisis. What that is just a way to make ourselves feel better. And so we spend taxpayer money to make ourselves feel better about the fact that we've put up a windmill, and we can say, oh, we're trying to address this issue. However, the way you personally use energy, that does make a difference. And that is the second thing. We need to pursue truth, and we need to accept personal responsibility. Genesis chapter 1 says that God made mankind in his image, and gave him dominion over the earth. We have a responsibility for the earth. We were created to be stewards of God's creation. Everything here, this is our responsibility. So if anyone should be concerned about it, it should be us, because it is in being concerned for the creation which God made and placed in our care that we honor God. So if there are ways in which we can take care of our environment, we can conserve, we can help, we can do the right thing, then we as individuals should do so. We should not rely on institutions to handle this sort of thing, nor should we blame institutions when they're not doing what we think they should be doing. Because fundamentally, the place where everything starts is with the individual. The world can do whatever it wants, but as Christians, we need to accept responsibility for God's creation as stewards of his good gifts. So that's what I'm thinking about this morning.